Hello from the poker machine capital of the world. In fact, the biggest gambling citadel of the world per dollar spent per citizen, and that is New South Wales. Poker machines, finally, there is a move on to bring some reform. Have a listen to these numbers. They are absolutely staggering. $8 billion a year in player losses. That is 1,000 per residence of New South Wales. It's estimated that about 80% of it comes from addicted gamblers, so the consequential social costs are enormous. Now, we're talking about actual revenue here. We're not talking about turnover. The turnover that goes through these machines is more like $100 billion. Last year's New South Wales Crime Commission report found that a huge chunk of the $95 billion that gets put through poker machines in pubs and clubs in New South Wales is money launderers. It's crime gangs laundering money. I mean, this is a dystopian nightmare. Clubs and pubs that create untold social problems, suicides, family breakdowns, poverty from people that can't help but spend money on the poker machines. And yet, successive governments have signed MOUs, memorandums of understanding, with the club's pokies lobby to say, we agree not to enact any reforms upon you over the next 3 or 4 years. What other industry does this? Goes to government and says, you must sign a contract to say that you will not reform in the interests of other citizens, but merely do what we tell you to do and not reform us, even though it has been proven that we have been engaging in systemic criminal activity while destroying people's lives. It's worse than that, of course, because Clubs New South Wales romps around the CBD of Sydney, taking people to court in private criminal prosecutions. I mean, they think they're the Hague, these guys. Can you believe it? They've taken Friendly Geordies, the YouTuber, and the whistleblower, the money laundering whistleblower in Clubs, Troy Stoltz, to court, a journalist and a whistleblower, dragging them through the court in a private criminal prosecution, not even bothering to get the DPP involved, just doing it themselves. Now, how have they been allowed to get away with this? It's a very powerful and aggressive pokies lobby, but they've been allowed to get away with it because the government revenues are so high. Billions of dollars flow to the state coffers, as they do in the other states. It's only WA where there's no pokies problem and no pokies revenue, because you can't play pokies there unless you go to the casino. So it's a matter of government policy which has brought this about. But why haven't they amended this policy? Well, one, there's the huge receipts from poker machines, billions of dollars flowing to the state government. The second thing, of course, is that people have bought this idea that clubs give back to the community. Well, Jeff Knapp, a forensic accountant, and I, a couple of years ago, we did an analysis of the financial statements of the top 20 clubs. And these are the really big gambling venues, the really big casinos. They're all approaching, like the Mounties and these big clubs in Fairfield and Bankstown Sports, they're approaching $100 million in revenue a year from pokies, which means something like 800 to $1 billion in turnover. Now, 20% or thereabouts of the income of these clubs is from food and beverage and other services. So it's about 80% from poker machines. How much do they give back then to the community in sponsorships for local sport and community groups? Well, we went through the 20 clubs and we found that 3 or 4% per member of these enormous pokies income, only 3 to 4% per member went to community projects. So what do they do with all this money? Where does it go? Massive empire building. Buying every house on the nearby street, putting in 10-pin bowling alleys, retirement villages, childcare facilities, anything to attract more people that might be able to fritter away their money on the pokies. The executive salaries of these guys has gone up a lot over the years, but a lot of it goes on empire building. And one classic example is the biggest club in the state for pokies was the Mounties out at Cabramatta, and they went and bought the Harbord Diggers on the headland over near me. The Harbord Diggers, they redid it. It's a $100 million job. If they were so into community, why would they be leaving the Cabramatta community to go to the freshwater community on Sydney's northern beaches? The community thing is a furphy. But finally, there's some good news. The Premier, Dominic Perrottet, has actually announced that he will introduce, if re-elected, a cashless gaming card. Now, we need Chris Minns to, as Anthony Robbins says, awaken the giant within, because Chris Minns's proposals for reform are just a tweak here and a tweak there. They're measly, they're feeble, there's nothing there. He needs to match this. This needs to be bipartisan. Now, Minns is ahead in the polls, so he probably thinks he's comfortable enough to get away with this and keep the pokey revenue coming in. And to be fair to him, the Labor Party gets a lot more money from poker machine revenues via trade union clubs than does the Liberal Party. But the fact is, this needs to be reformed. The cashless card will stop money laundering, and it will be able to curb problem gambling as well, problem pokies use, because people will have to put it on a card. It will be trackable. They'll only have a certain amount of money on the card. They can't go and get their bank card and spend more, and so on. It's the most significant reform proposal ever in the poker machine industry, and it's about time Labor got on board this and made it a bipartisan thing. Minns will probably win the election if the polls are correct, but he also runs the risk of being under the influence, under the spell of the poker machine industry, controlled like every other government before him if he gets into power. But this is a decisive move by Perrottet. I mean, you can't pick the parties apart on things like fracking. So it will be interesting to see whether this Perrottet wedge will force Chris Minns into coming up with a cashless gaming card himself. At the moment, he's sitting there saying, no, we're just going to have a trial in a few venues. A trial. Well, a trial is a trial. And trials, of course, rarely go anywhere. So we need him to really get going on this and attack this problem, because it may be the big issue for the election. Thanks for all your support at Michael West Media. We've just copped a couple more legal threats, so we need all the support we can get. So if you could throw us a few dollars on Patreon, that will be much appreciated.